Does it make sense?
Yes and no is the simple answer to that. I think there are a couple of things that are really important as a foundation for this. First of all, it's been going on for a long time, this discussion. Two things though. One is these are not just airlines. These are holistic entities that are designed to, the airline is designed to form an important part of creating a whole economy around tourism, around travel. And hence you've had Abu Dhabi, for example, buying major art galleries, the Louvre and the Guggenheim, that sort of thing. So they're part of that whole strategy. So putting the two together, even though Abu Dhabi and Dubai are quite close together, is quite difficult. The second point is that Abu Dhabi has lots of oil, and when the Etihad collapse occurred, oil prices were way down. They're back up again, and Abu Dhabi's economy is not looking so bad. Whereas Dubai, of course, has no oil, and they've had to try harder. So just with those two qualifications in it, it is not quite as easy as just putting two airlines together, that's for sure.
Add to that the duplication of routes for both Etihad and Emirates. If this were to work out, how will it look? What kind of consolidation can we expect?
Yeah, well, first of all, it wouldn't happen straight away. What could happen is there could be some coordination of activity, which you always have to watch out a little bit for in terms of antitrust issues, but I think they could coordinate routes if they wanted to, and that would be a progressive way of moving into it. Part of an issue there, though, is that to a large extent against Sir Tim Clark's wishes, I think Emirates, which is a strictly long-haul operation, combined in many ways with Fly Dubai, the short-haul narrow-body aircraft operator, whereas Etihad has got both long-haul and short-haul aircraft. So there's a bit of complementarity, but also quite a lot of overlap in those structures. So if you do start to rationalise, you're talking about probably removing quite a lot of aircraft from the fleet initially.
Peter, it's Rish in Hong Kong. It does seem as though, I mean, Tim Clark would not go for this, surely. He is boss at Emirates.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Clark was quoted earlier this year as saying, probably not in the short to medium term. Now, Tim Clark's not 30 anymore, and I suspect the short to medium term would perhaps see Tim move along eventually. But no, I know he wasn't all that keen in having Fly Dubai in the operation. I mean, it's an incredibly complex operation. If you've ever seen any of those Dubai Airport and Dubai shows on TV, just the complexity of making these things work, and to put two airlines with roughly similar operations together an hour's drive away is very, very complex. That's quite apart from the politics and the financials and all of that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, and this is just it. I mean, but let's look at the reasons it would actually work here, though, Peter. We do have the airlines themselves have the same kind of fleet here. There's operational synergies, certainly. You know, give us the reasons why it could happen.
Well, it could happen. Well, because, well, just to go back a little bit, Emirates was a sort of Singapore Inc. type model when it started 25, 30 years ago, and really evolved into that. Etihad came along much later and wanted to do the same sorts of things in terms of this holistic approach to the economic activity, but they couldn't get big fast enough, so they did partnerships, and there are still a lot of those lingering partnerships. They were also part of the downfall of Etihad. So Emirates is the bigger of the two, and therefore much more dominant in the process. And as things deteriorate with Etihad, you have to start to think, well, where does this airline go? Its partnership strategy hasn't worked. It's really struggling around for another role. And once things, you'd have to think perhaps once things get bad enough for Etihad, then you start to look at, well, there are problems with it, but we have to move to doing something rational.
Peter, there's a huge amount of opacity here as to who really owns and controls these airlines. We know that the governments of the respective Emirates do control the both of them. The point being, We had a terrible financial crisis in Dubai. There was a talk of Abu Dhabi lending them money. We don't know how much Etihad was involved with that. So there's so much smoke around and not even any mirrors.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was quite a lot of, we're talking families here as well, not just different sheikdoms. There's a lot of family issues involved in this with all the usual things you expect with family relationships, and then you add money to that and politics and a whole lot of other things. I mean, where that goes is it probably leads you to a point where you don't really seriously look at a total merger and try to resolve ownership issues and so forth, because logically as an airline, Emirates is bigger and therefore it would own the smaller one. However, Abu Dhabi is the centre of government. It's got the oil, those sorts of things. So ownership is probably a long way from occurring at this stage. It's really much more coordination of the operations, I would think.
Peter, you talked about the options for Etihad. Where does it go from here? This is an airline expected to be in losses through 2022. What are the options if this merger doesn't go through? What are the options for Etihad for a turnaround?
Well, let's assume for a start, that was a good question. Let's assume for a start that the economy, the global economy, stays reasonably strong. That's, who knows where we go. The time, in terms of cycles, we are looking at perhaps down the barrel of another downturn. If so, things get worse. Etihad is at that stage now where it hasn't got a business plan in place, a new business plan in place. Its essential strategy seems at the moment just to be reducing costs. And that's something that really doesn't go anywhere other than reduce losses. It's not a long-term strategy for this is how we position in the future. And as I say, if things economically, financially do get a bit tougher, then they're really going to be struggling. For me, I can't really see a serious role for Etihad from where it stands at the moment. It either has to start investing again and growing.
Yeah, Peter, I was going to get to, they have
really revise.
Yeah, they've had a failed strategy. I mean, they had a stake in Air Berlin. It was a partnership, huge one in Jet at the moment. We've also got them at one stage with Alitalia as well. And the two of those, at least, have fallen to pieces. But Qatar has done something interesting here. Qatar Airways, it's upped its stake to nearly 10%. That's the threshold, as it were, in Cathay Pacific. And, of course, they've got the stake in IAG as well. What are they up to?
Well, and you're quite right there. And also they've got LATAM, and each of these, LATAM in South America, the biggest airline in that region. So they've got three major one-world carriers, minority shares, and as Akbar Al-Baker says, these are investments, and they've actually been quite good investments so far. Cathay I'm not quite so sure about for the longer term, but certainly IAG and LATAM. I think you do these things as an airline as a partnership bonding exercise, as well as an investment. But it's not the same strategy as Etihad went through. That was much more a non-organic growth option, whereas I think with Qatar it's looking much more at a partnership approach and to anchor, to cement those partnerships.